The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Willow Creek's small chapel, casting kaleidoscope patterns across Willa Grace Monroe's simple white dress. Her trembling fingers adjusted her golden-framed glasses for the 100th time as she waited at the altar, her heart fluttering with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. The wooden pews creaked with the weight of the townsfolk. Everyone knew everyone in Willow Creek, which made the next moments even more devastating. The whispers started as a gentle ripple, then grew into a concerned murmur. 20 minutes had passed since the ceremony should have begun, and there was still no sign of the groom. "Perhaps he's stuck in traffic," someone whispered, though everyone knew there hadn't been traffic in Willow Creek since the county fair 3 years ago. Willa's mother's voice cut through the anxious silence like a knife. "This is exactly what happens when you rush into things." The words weren't meant to carry, but in the intimate space of the chapel they echoed like thunder. Tears threatened to spill from Willa's green eyes as she twisted a loose strand of blonde hair around her finger. The bouquet of wildflowers, in her hands, arranged by herself just that morning in her small flower shop, trembled slightly. Among the seated guests, Cassian James Wells sat quietly observing the unfolding scene. His usually impeccable appearance, casual yet refined in his light cotton shirt and dark jeans, seemed at odds with the turmoil in his steel blue eyes. He watched as Willa's shoulders began to curl inward, recognizing a pain he knew all too well. The memory of his own wedding day 5 years ago flashed unbidden through his mind. The same chapel, different faces, but the same crushing weight of abandonment. His fingers unconsciously moved to adjust his sleeve, a habit he'd developed when trying to maintain control. The murmurs grew louder as Willa's uncle finally approached the altar, his face grim. He whispered something to her, and Cassian watched as all color drained from her face. The groom wasn't coming. He had fled, leaving nothing but a hastily written note and a chapel full of pitying faces. "Oh, sweetheart," Willa's mother's voice carried again, this time deliberately loud. "I told you this might happen. You've always been so, well, you know how you are." Willa's hands flew to her glasses, adjusting them needlessly, a defensive gesture that made something in Cassian's chest constrict. He recognized it, the desperate attempt to appear composed while your world crumbled around you. Without conscious thought, Cassian found himself standing. The wooden floor creaked under his feet as he moved forward, drawing every eye in the chapel. His heart thundered in his chest, but his steps remained steady as he approached the altar. Willa looked up at him, her green eyes wide behind those slightly askew glasses. There was something in that look, vulnerability mixed with a quiet strength, that resonated deep within him. "I know we don't know each other well," he said softly, his voice carrying in the hushed chapel. "But I understand." His hand, steady despite his racing pulse, extended toward her. "And if you're willing, I'm offering you a choice." The chapel fell silent. Even the birds outside seemed to hold their breath. Willa stared at his outstretched hand, her own fingers still twisted in her hair. "Why?" she whispered, barely audible. Cassian's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is not let others write our story for us." In that moment, surrounded by the judgmental whispers and pitying glances of their small town, something shifted in Willa's eyes. She looked at Cassian, really looked at him, and saw not pity but understanding. Not rescue but partnership. Her hand, when it slipped into his, was cold but steady. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through both of them, a quiet acknowledgement of shared pain and, perhaps, shared hope. "Are you sure?" Reverend Miller asked, his weathered face showing concern mixed with curiosity. Cassian's eyes never left Willa's face. "I am if you are." Willa's voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "Yes." The ceremony that followed was brief, nothing like the elaborate celebration that had been planned. No flowing vows or tearful promises of eternal love. Instead, they exchanged simple words of commitment. Their hands joined more in mutual support than passionate embrace. As they walked down the aisle together, Cassian felt Willa's hand trembling slightly in his. He gave it a gentle squeeze, a silent promise of solidarity. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture they both recognized the beginning of something neither had expected. Outside, the spring breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, and the sun painted everything in a gentle, golden light. But as they stood on the chapel steps, reality began to sink in. They were married, strangers bound by law in a desperate moment of courage. Willa's mother approached, her face a mask of concerned disapproval. "Willa, darling, what have you done? This isn't like one of your impulsive flower arrangements that you can just redo if it doesn't work out." Before Willa could respond, Cassian's voice cut through, calm but firm. "Mrs. Monroe, I believe we have some paperwork to complete inside." His hand remained steady on the small of Willa's back, a quiet shield against the criticism. As they drove, away from the chapel and Cassian's sleek black car, the silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Willa's fingers fidgeted with her glasses again, and Cassian found himself adjusting his watch. Finally, at a red light, Cassian turned to her. "I have a house on Maple Drive. It's too big for one person, but it might be just right for two people, figuring things out." Willa looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the same quiet determination she'd glimpsed at the altar. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted softly. "Neither do I," Cassian replied honestly. "But maybe that's okay." As they drove through the familiar streets of Willow Creek, both knew their lives had changed irrevocably. What neither knew was whether this impulsive decision would heal their wounds or create new ones. But for now, in the gentle light of a spring afternoon, they had chosen to face the unknown together rather than crumble alone. The car turned onto Maple Drive, and with it, their story began. Not with passionate declarations or fairy tale promises, but with two broken hearts choosing to be brave enough to try again. The house on Maple Drive loomed before them, a stately two-story colonial with white trim and dark shutters. Willa stood beside Cassian's car, clutching her small purse, her wedding bouquet forgotten on the passenger seat. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, and somewhere in the distance a wind chime tinkled softly. "It's beautiful," she whispered, adjusting her glasses with trembling fingers. The house before her seemed to represent everything she wasn't: polished, sophisticated, perfectly put together. Cassian watched her from the corner of his eye as he retrieved a small overnight bag from his trunk, the emergency bag he always kept there for unexpected late nights at the office. "It's just a house," he said softly, recognizing the insecurity in her stance. "Houses don't judge." A small laugh escaped her lips, surprising them both. "Mine definitely would. It would probably tell me I'm not fancy enough for its fancy windows." Something in Cassian's chest tightened at her words, recognizing the deep-seated insecurity behind the attempted humor. He found himself wanting to tell her about the countless nights he'd spent alone in this too-big house, how its emptiness had often felt like a judgment of its own. Instead, he adjusted his sleeve and gestured toward the front door. "Shall we?" The key turned smoothly in the lock, and they stepped into the foyer together. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the quiet space. Everything was immaculate. Hardwood floors gleaming, surfaces dust-free, nothing out of place. It spoke of order, control, and solitude. I should probably go home and get some clothes," Willa said, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "And check on my shop. The flowers need watering, and I have orders for—" "We can go together," Cassian interrupted gently. "If you want. I have my car, and it's better than you walking across town in your wedding dress." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of how surreal this all was. Just hours ago they had been strangers. Now they were married, standing in his foyer, trying to figure out how to navigate this unprecedented situation. "I must look a mess," Willa murmured, more to herself than to him. Her fingers moved to adjust her glasses again, a nervous habit that Cassian was beginning to recognize and, surprisingly, find endearing. "You look like someone who survived something difficult with grace," he replied. the words coming unbidden. When she looked at him with surprise, he felt his ears warm slightly and quickly added, "Let me show you around before we go to your place." The tour was brief, but revealing. The kitchen was all sleek appliances and granite countertops, barely used. The living room held comfortable but pristine furniture, and a wall of windows overlooked a backyard with potential for a garden. Upstairs, Cassian showed her the guest room, your room if you want it, and his home office where a laptop and neat stacks of papers suggested where he spent most of his time. "My room is down the hall," he said, gesturing but not opening the door. "You'll have complete privacy here. We figure things out as we go." Willa nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. For being kind." Cassian's hand moved to his watch, adjusting it slightly. "Kindness had nothing to do with it," he admitted. "Firstly, 5 years ago I was where you were today, different chapel, same situation. When I saw you standing there," he trailed off, unable to fully articulate the mixture of empathy, impulse, and something else that had driven him to act. Understanding dawned in Willa's eyes. "Oh," she breathed. This wasn't just kindness or pity. It was recognition. Shared pain. Her heart ached for the man he must have been 5 years ago, standing alone at an altar. Did you ever find out why?" "She left a note," Cassian said, his voice carefully neutral. "Said she couldn't bear the thought of being married to someone so controlled, so predictable." His lips curved in a self-deprecating smile. "She wanted passion, spontaneity. Ironic that the most spontaneous thing I've ever done was marrying a stranger today." Willa's hand reached out instinctively, touching his arm lightly. "Well, I think spontaneous looks good on you." The moment the words left her mouth, she blushed furiously, withdrawing her hand. We should probably go get my things." The drive to Willa's apartment above her flower shop was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. The familiar streets of Willow Creek seemed different somehow, as if the events of the day had altered the very fabric of their small town. They passed the town square where Mrs. Henderson was already gossiping with her friends outside the diner, no doubt discussing the morning's dramatic events. Willa's flower shop, Wild Grace Flowers, was a small but charming storefront with window boxes full of bright blooms. As they parked, Cassian noticed how Willa's entire demeanor changed when she looked at her shop. Her shoulders straightened, her eyes brightened. This was her domain, her passion. "I'll just be a minute," she said, fumbling with her keys. "I need to check on the orders for tomorrow and water the—" "I'll help," Cassian said, already opening his car door. When she looked surprised, he added, "2 sets of hands are better than one. Just tell me what to do." Inside, the shop was a feast for the senses. Colors, scents, and textures everywhere. It was organized chaos, so different from Cassian's ordered world. But he could see the logic in it, the careful consideration behind each display. Willa moved through the space with confidence he hadn't seen before, checking on arrangements, adjusting stems, making notes in a well-worn notebook. "Could you fill this watering can?" she asked, handing him a green metal can. "The sink is in the back room." As Cassian moved through the shop, he noticed small touches that spoke of Willa's personality. Handwritten care instructions for different plants, cheerful thank you notes from customers pinned to a board, a small collection of whimsical garden gnomes on a shelf. This was more than a shop. It was an extension of her heart. Upstairs, her apartment was small but cozy, with windows that flooded the space with natural light. Potted plants occupied every available surface, and books about flowers and gardening filled a small bookshelf. While Willa changed out of her wedding dress and packed some clothes, Cassian found himself studying a photo on her wall, a younger Willa in a field of wildflowers, her smile unguarded and bright. "That was taken at the Henderson farm," she said, emerging from her bedroom with a duffel bag. She'd changed into jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. "They have this amazing wildflower meadow. I used to dream about getting married there, actually." She paused, realizing what she'd said. and quickly added, "Not that, I mean, this isn't—" "It's okay," Cassian said gently. "We can acknowledge the strangeness of this situation. We're both here by choice, but it's okay to recognize that it's not what either of us planned." Willa nodded, grateful for his understanding. As they locked up the shop and headed back to his car, she found herself studying his profile in the fading light. He was handsome in a classical way, yes, but there was something more. A kindness in his eyes, a gentleness in his movements that belied his reserved exterior. Back at the house on Maple Drive, they ordered Chinese food, neither feeling up to cooking, and ate in the kitchen, sharing comfortable silence punctuated by small talk about their respective businesses. Cassian spoke briefly about his role as CEO of a regional technology firm, and Willa shared stories about some of her more interesting flower arrangements. As night fell and they prepared to retire to their separate rooms, Willa paused at the top of the stairs. "Cassian." When he turned to look at her, she took a deep breath. "Thank you, not just for today, but for making this feel less scary than it could be." Cassian's hand moved to adjust his watch, but he caught himself and let it fall to his side instead. "Thank you for being brave enough to take my hand," he replied simply. They both knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, questions from townspeople, calls from family members, the reality of building a life together from such unusual beginnings. But for now, in the quiet of their first night as unexpected spouses, they had found a kind of peace in their shared understanding. As Willa lay in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, she realized that for the first time since being left at the altar that morning, her hands weren't shaking. And down the hall, Cassian sat on the edge of his bed, realizing that his house no longer echoed with emptiness. The first rays of dawn crept through the unfamiliar windows of the guest room, and Willa found herself staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together if yesterday had been real. The comfortable bed beneath her was certainly not her own, and the soft Egyptian cotton sheets were a far cry from her well-worn floral ones at home. A gentle knock at her door made her sit up, hastily reaching for her glasses on the nightstand. "Yes?" "I made coffee," Cassian's voice came through the door, slightly uncertain. "And there's breakfast if you're hungry." Willa glanced at her reflection in the dresser mirror, running fingers through her sleep-tousled blonde waves. "I'll be right down," she called back, trying to sound more composed than she felt. The kitchen, when she entered it 10 minutes later, was filled with the rich aroma of coffee and something burning. She found Cassian standing at the stove, staring at what appeared to be severely overcooked toast, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. "I don't usually cook," he admitted, turning to her with an apologetic look. "The coffee maker I can handle. Anything beyond that." He gestured helplessly at the blackened bread. A giggle escaped before Willa could stop it. The sight of this perfectly put-together CEO failing at making toast was somehow both endearing and reassuring. "I can help with that," she offered, moving toward the stove. "Though I should warn you, I'm known to be a bit clumsy in the kitchen. I've already demonstrated my culinary incompetence, so you're in good company." His lips curved into a small smile as he stepped aside, making room for her at the counter. They worked together in surprisingly comfortable synchronization, Willa making fresh toast and scrambled eggs while Cassian set the table and poured coffee. When she nearly dropped an egg, his hand shot out to catch it, their fingers brushing, momentarily. "Nice catch," she murmured, adjusting her glasses to hide her blush. "Years of corporate reflexes," he replied, his own ears slightly pink. Catching falling contracts, diving for dropped phones. The breakfast they eventually produced was simple but edible. As they sat at the kitchen island, Willa noticed how Cassian's kitchen, despite its professional-grade appliances, had an unlived-in feel. The cabinets were organized with military precision, but many looked unused. "Do you ever cook?" she asked, curious. Cassian adjusted his watch, a habit she was beginning to recognize as his version of her glasses fidgeting. "I usually eat at the office or order in after—" He paused, then continued carefully. "After what happened 5 years ago, I threw myself into work. It was easier than coming home to an empty house." Willa's heart ached at the quiet admission. I understand that. After my dad died, Mom and I ate takeout for months. Sometimes it's easier not to face empty spaces. Their eyes met over their coffee cups, another moment of unexpected understanding passing between them. Then Cassian's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. His expression tightened as he looked at the screen. Your mother? Willa guessed. Board members, he corrected, running a hand through his hair. Apparently, news travels fast in Willow Creek. They're concerned about the company's image. Oh. Willa's stomach clenched. Of course, a CEO suddenly marrying a small-town florist would raise eyebrows. I'm sorry if I've caused problems. Don't. Cassian cut her off firmly. My personal life is my business. Besides, his lips quirked slightly, they've been after me to settle down for years, though I doubt this is what they had in mind. Before Willa could respond, her own phone chimed. The color drained from her face as she read the message. Mom wants to have lunch, she said quietly, to discuss this rash decision and how to minimize the damage. Cassian's jaw tightened. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. Willa twisted, a strand of hair around her finger. She means well, in her own way, and I have to face her eventually. Then I'm coming with you. Willa looked up, startled. You don't have to. We're married, he stated simply. However it happened, we're in this together. I won't let you face criticism alone. Something warm unfurled in Willa's chest at his words. Thank you, she whispered. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, then faced the reality of their day. Willa needed to open her shop, and Cassian had meetings he couldn't postpone. The normality of their morning routine felt strange against the backdrop of their extraordinary situation. I'll pick you up at noon, Cassian said as they stood in his driveway. For lunch with your mother. Willa nodded, clutching her purse. Cassian? When he turned, she continued hesitantly. What do we tell people? About us? He considered for a moment, his steel blue eyes thoughtful. The truth, he finally said. We chose each other. The rest is our business. The morning at Wild Grace Flowers passed in a blur of curious customers and knowing looks. Willa focused on her arrangements, letting the familiar work of cutting stems and arranging blooms calm her nerves. But her mind kept drifting to the way Cassian had caught that falling egg. How his kitchen had felt less sterile with 2 coffee cups on the counter. Her best friend, Sadie Mae, burst through the shop door mid-morning, her dark curls bouncing with indignation. Girl, you got married? To Cassian Wells? And I had to hear about it from Mrs. Henderson at the diner. Willa's hands stilled on the roses she was trimming. It's complicated. Uncomplicate it for me, Sadie demanded, perching on the shop's counter. Because last I checked, you were supposed to marry someone else yesterday and now you're Mrs. CEO. What happened? Looking at her friend's concerned face, Willa felt tears threatening. He left, Sadie. Just left. No explanation. Just a note. And I was standing there feeling like the biggest fool in Willow Creek, and then she paused, remembering the steady way Cassian had looked at her, offering not rescue but understanding. And then, Sadie prompted gently. And then Cassian stood up. He knew exactly what I was feeling because he'd been there himself. He offered me a choice and I chose to be brave. Sadie was quiet for a long moment, studying her friend's face. Are you okay? I think I might be, Willa answered honestly. It's strange, but there's something about him. He makes me feel safe even though we barely know each other. Well, he's certainly easy on the eyes. Sadie grinned, then sobered. But seriously, what about your mom? She's probably having kittens over this. Willa glanced at the clock. I'll find out at lunch. Cassian's coming with me. Good, Sadie said firmly. You shouldn't face Hurricane Regina alone. She hopped off the counter and pulled Willa into a tight hug. Just remember, you're stronger than you think, sugar. And if this Cassian hurts you, I know where to hide the body. Just then the shop's bell chimed. Cassian stood in the doorway, impeccable in his business suit, looking slightly apologetic for interrupting. "Ready?" he asked Willa softly. Sadie gave him an appraising look, then whispered loudly to Willa, "Definitely easy on the eyes." "Sadie," Willa hissed, blushing furiously. But when she looked at Cassian, she caught the hint of an amused smile, playing at his lips. He held the door open for her, his hand finding its way to the small of her back as they walked to his car. As they drove toward the diner where her mother waited, Willa felt her anxiety building. Cassian must have noticed because he reached over and quietly took her hand. "Remember," he said softly, "we chose each other." And somehow, sitting in his car with their fingers intertwined, facing down the dragons of small-town gossip and maternal disappointment, didn't seem quite so daunting. They might have started this marriage as strangers, but they were quickly becoming something else. Allies, at least. And maybe, just maybe, something more. Willow Creek's Main Street Diner had been serving the same menu since 1962, and Regina Monroe had been holding court in the same corner booth for nearly as long. As Willa and Cassian approached the restaurant, they could see her through the window, ramrod straight in her designer dress, stirring her iced tea with precise movements. "We can still leave," Cassian murmured, his hand steady on Willa's lower back. Willa adjusted her glasses, taking a deep breath. "No, we can't. In Willow Creek, running from Regina Monroe is like trying to outrun a tornado. It just makes the damage worse when it catches you." The bell above the door announced their arrival with cheerful ignorance of the tension. Every head in the diner turned to watch them walk to the corner booth, whispers following in their wake. Regina's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Darling," she said, rising to air-kiss Willa's cheek. "And Mr. Wells, how unexpected." "Mrs. Monroe," Cassian replied smoothly, pulling out a chair for Willa before taking his own seat. His posture was relaxed, but Willa noticed how he positioned himself slightly between her and her mother, like a shield. "Mom," Willa started, but Regina held up a manicured hand. "Let's order first, shall we? These conversations are always better with food." She signaled the waitress with practiced authority. "My usual, Penny. Willa will have the garden salad. She needs to watch her figure now that she's married to someone of Mr. Wells's standing." Willa felt Cassian tense beside her. Before he could speak, she straightened in her chair. "Actually, I'll have the burger, with extra fries." She felt rather than saw Cassian's small smile of approval. Regina's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Well, marriage has certainly made you bold." "I believe that's her natural state," Cassian interjected smoothly, "when people bother to look past their own expectations." He ordered a coffee, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp. The moment Penny walked away, Regina leaned forward. "Now then, let's discuss damage control. I've already spoken to Reverend Miller about keeping the details of yesterday's incident quiet. We can craft a narrative that's less embarrassing for everyone involved." "Embarrassing?" Willa's voice was barely a whisper. "Well, darling, you have to admit, being left at the altar and then immediately marrying a stranger, it's hardly the behavior of a well-bred young lady. Though," Regina's gaze swept over Cassian appraisingly, "I suppose we could spin this as a whirlwind romance that simply couldn't wait. Mr. Wells's position in the community would make that somewhat believable." "Mrs. Monroe," Cassian's voice was controlled but carried an edge of steel, "I don't believe our marriage needs any spinning. We made a choice. Together." Regina's laugh was like wind chimes made of ice. "Oh, please. We both know what this was. You saw my daughter in a vulnerable moment and decided to play white knight. Very gallant, I'm sure, but hardly the basis for a lasting marriage." "Mom, stop." Willa's voice was stronger now. "You don't know anything about it. I know you, Willa Grace. You've always been delicate, prone to flights of fancy and poor decisions. Just look at your little flower shop, a waste of your business degree, barely breaking even most months." Willa's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Cassian noticed and, without drawing attention to it, moved his hand to rest beside hers on the table, his pinky finger just touching hers. The small point of contact anchored her. "Actually," Willa said, drawing strength from that touch. Grace turned a profit last quarter, a significant one. I've been reinvesting in the business, expanding our wedding and corporate services." Regina waved this away. "That's hardly the point." "I believe it is exactly the point," Cassian interrupted. "Your daughter is not only creative but also business savvy. She's built something meaningful from the ground up. That takes courage and intelligence, qualities I noticed long before yesterday." Both Willa and Regina stared at him. "You noticed me?" Willa asked softly. Cassian's ears reddened slightly, but he held her gaze. "It's hard not to notice someone who puts so much care into everything they do. I've walked past your shop every morning for the past year. I've seen how you treat each customer like they matter, how you remember everyone's preferences, how you stay late arranging displays that make people smile on their morning commute." A warm flush spread across Willa's cheeks. She'd never noticed him noticing her. "Well," Regina said after a moment, her voice brittle, "that's very sweet. But it doesn't change the fact that this marriage is built on impulse and desperation. Really, Willa, what were you thinking? You've always been prone to these emotional decisions ever since you were little. Remember that time you tried to save all those stray cats? Or when you thought you could make a living selling painted rocks?" Each example landed like a slap. Old wounds reopened with surgical precision. But before Willa could shrink into herself, Cassian spoke again. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm going to be very clear about something." His voice was quiet, but carried an authority that made even Regina pause. "The way you speak to and about your daughter stops now. Not because I'm her husband or because of my position in the community, but because Willa deserves better. She always has." The diner had grown silent, everyone pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Penny approached, with their food, then quickly retreated from the tension. Regina's face had gone very still. "I'm only trying to protect her." "No," Willa said suddenly, surprising herself with her steadiness. "You're trying to control me, to make me small enough to fit your idea of who I should be." She turned to look at Cassian, drawing strength from the quiet approval in his eyes. "But I'm done being small." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I married Cassian because when everyone else was looking at me with pity or judgment, he saw me. Really saw me. And maybe it was sudden, maybe it was unconventional, but it was my choice. Mine." Regina's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. "Willa Grace Monroe, sit down. You're making a scene." "Wells," Cassian said calmly, standing beside Willa. "Her name is Willa Grace Wells now, and I believe we're done here." He placed several bills on the table, then offered Willa his arm. She took it, her chin high despite her trembling fingers. As they walked toward the door, Regina called out, "This isn't over, Willa. You'll see I'm right. You always do." Willa paused at the door, turning back to look at her mother. "No, Mom. This time you're wrong. And I think maybe you always have been." Outside, the spring air was sweet with the scent of blooming dogwood trees. Willa's legs felt like jelly, and she leaned slightly against Cassian's solid presence. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I think..." She took a shaky breath. "I think I actually am. I've never stood up to her like that before." "You were magnificent." The simple sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter. "Did you really notice me before yesterday?" Cassian's hand moved to adjust his watch, but he caught himself and instead reached for her hand. "Every day, the way you'd sing to your flowers when you thought no one was looking, how you'd leave little bouquets on the benches downtown for people to find. I noticed everything except how to find the courage to talk to you." Willa's eyes stung with tears, but for once they weren't from sadness. "Maybe we both needed yesterday to find our courage." They stood there on the sidewalk, hands clasped, as the town bustled around them. Through the diner window, they could see Regina still sitting in her booth, phone in hand, no doubt already calling her sisters to share her version of events. But for the first time in her life, Willa found she didn't care what story her mother would tell. She was finally ready to write her own. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of wild grace flowers as Willa arranged a bouquet of spring blooms. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but her mind kept drifting back to lunch, to Cassian's steady presence, to her own unexpected courage, to the revelation that he had noticed her all along. The bell above the door chimed, and Logan Brooks, her oldest friend and delivery driver, walked in with his characteristic easy smile. "Hey, boss lady. Got those special order lilies from the Henderson farm for tomorrow's, His smile faltered slightly. "Are you okay? You look different." Willa adjusted her glasses, a small smile playing at her lips. "Different how?" "I don't know. Taller, maybe. Like you finally grew into yourself or something." He ran a hand through his sandy hair. "Sadie told me about lunch. Said the whole town's buzzing about how you stood up to Regina Monroe." "News travels fast," Willa murmured, focusing on trimming a stem. "It's Willow Creek. News travels at the speed of Mrs. Henderson's coffee rounds." Logan leaned against the counter. "So, Cassian Wells, huh? Never would have seen that coming." Before Willa could respond, the shop's door opened again. Cassian stood there, looking slightly out of place in his business suit among the casual charm of the flower shop. His eyes found Willa immediately, softening at the sight of her surrounded by flowers. "I brought dinner," he said, holding up a takeout bag. "Thought you might be hungry after." He trailed off, noticing Logan. "Oh, Cassian, this is Logan Brooks, my friend and delivery driver. Logan, this is..." Willa paused, the word husband still feeling strange on her tongue. "Cassian Wells," he finished smoothly, extending his hand to Logan. "Nice to meet you." Logan's handshake was firm, his eyes appraising but friendly. "Likewise. Been helping Willa keep this place running since she opened." There was a gentle protectiveness in his tone that made Cassian's respect for him tick up several notches. "Then I owe you thanks," Cassian replied. This shop means everything to her. The simple acknowledgement made Willa's heart flutter. Her previous fiancé had always referred to the shop as her little hobby. "Well, I should get these lilies in water," Logan said, shooting Willa a subtle thumbs up when Cassian wasn't looking. "See you tomorrow, boss, Mr. Wells." After Logan left, Cassian set the takeout bags on the counter. "I hope Chinese is okay. I remembered you liked it from yesterday." "It's perfect," Willa said softly, touched that he'd noticed such a small detail. "Let me just finish this arrangement and we can eat." Cassian moved to stand beside her, watching as she worked. "Show me?" he asked quietly. Surprised but pleased, Willa handed him a stem. "Hold it at an angle, like this," she demonstrated. "Every flower has its own personality. You have to listen to what it wants to be." His hands, so sure in the corporate world, were endearingly careful with the delicate blooms. When he accidentally crushed a petal, his face fell slightly. "It's okay," Willa assured him quickly. "Here." She stepped behind him, her hands guiding his. Gentle but firm, like you're holding something precious but not afraid of breaking it. The moment stretched between them, both acutely aware of their proximity. Cassian's cologne mixed with the scent of flowers, creating something uniquely intoxicating. When Willa stepped back, her cheeks were flushed. "You're a good teacher," Cassian said, his voice slightly husky. They ate dinner at the shop's counter, sharing stories between bites of lo mein. Cassian told her about his first job out of college, working in a tiny cubicle and dreaming big. Willa shared how she'd saved for 3 years to open Wild Grace, working double shifts at the diner and selling arrangements from her apartment. "Why flowers?" Cassian asked, genuinely curious. Willa twisted a strand of hair around her finger, thinking. "They're honest," she finally said. "They don't pretend to be anything they're not. A rose doesn't try to be a daisy, it just blooms where it's planted and makes the world more beautiful by being exactly what it is." Cassian studied her face in the soft evening light. "Like someone else I know." The warmth in his voice made her breath catch. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. The message made him frown slightly. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Board meeting tomorrow. They want to discuss recent developments." He adjusted his watch, a gesture she now recognized as anxiety. They're concerned about the company's image. A CEO who marries a stranger isn't exactly conventional. Oh. Willa's stomach twisted. "Should I mean, do you need me to—" "I need you to be exactly who you are," Cassian said firmly. "The board can either accept that or—" He shrugged, surprising himself with how little he cared about their opinion on this matter. "But your company is successful because I know how to make good decisions. And yesterday?" His eyes met hers. "Yesterday was the best decision I've made in years." The simple conviction in his voice made Willa's eyes sting. Unable to find words, she reached across the counter and squeezed his hand. He turned his palm up, interlacing their fingers. Later, as they drove home, and when had Cassian's house started feeling like home? Willa gathered her courage. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. This morning you said you noticed me before, walking past the shop and everything. Why didn't you ever come in?" Cassian was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the wheel. "I was afraid," he finally admitted. "After what happened 5 years ago, I built walls, focused on work, kept everything controlled and predictable. But every morning, I'd walk past your shop and see you arranging flowers or laughing with customers, and something in me wanted to break those walls down." He glanced at her. "You made me want to be brave again." "And now?" Willa asked softly. "Now?" A small smile played at his lips. "Now I'm terrified in the best possible way. Because for the first time in 5 years, I care more about what could go right than what could go wrong." They pulled into the driveway of the house on Maple Drive, but neither moved to get out of the car immediately. The evening was soft around them, crickets chirping in the distance. "Cassian?" Willa's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm glad you noticed me." He turned to look at her, his steel blue eyes intense in the gathering dusk. "I'm glad you let me see you." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Willa's phone chimed, a text from Sadie asking if she was okay. After the lunch showdown, breaking the spell. Inside, they moved through their evening routine with growing familiarity. Willa made tea while Cassian checked his emails. They shared the couch in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but anchored by the other's presence. As they prepared to head upstairs for the night, Cassian paused. "About tomorrow's board meeting. Would you want to have dinner afterward? There's a place just outside town by the lake. It's quiet, away from prying eyes." Willa's heart skipped. "Like a date?" "Like two people who did everything backwards, getting to know each other properly," he replied with a soft smile. "I'd like that," she said, adjusting her glasses to hide her pleased blush. Later, lying in bed, Willa thought about how much had changed in just 2 days. She'd lost the future she thought she wanted, and gained something she never could have imagined. Her mother's words still echoed in her mind, but they seemed fainter, now drowned out by the memory of Cassian's hands carefully holding a flower stem, his eyes watching her with wonder as she worked. Down the hall, Cassian sat at his desk, trying to focus on tomorrow's presentation, but his mind kept drifting to the way Willa's hands had guided his, to the strength she'd shown at lunch, to the way she made his carefully ordered world feel suddenly, wonderfully alive with possibility. Neither knew that tomorrow would bring challenges they hadn't expected. But for tonight, in the quiet of their shared home, they were both learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let your walls down and let someone in. The morning sun glinted off the steel and glass headquarters of Wells Technologies as Cassian straightened his tie in his office bathroom. His reflection showed the same composed CEO he'd always been, but something had shifted beneath the surface. The thought of Willa at home. When had he started thinking of it as their home? Making breakfast in her pajamas with bedhead and that adorable confused morning expression made his usually stern expression soften. A knock at his door brought him back to the present. His assistant, Beverly, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who had been with the company since its early days, entered with a stack of papers. "The board members are gathering," she said, then paused, studying his face. "You seem different today." Cassian raised an eyebrow. "Different?" "Less—" Beverly searched for the word. "Imprisoned." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed, with a text from Willa. "Good luck today. Remember, a rose doesn't try to be a daisy." Something warm bloomed in his chest. He'd only known her for 3 days, but somehow she knew exactly what he needed to hear. The boardroom was thick with tension when he entered. Richard Blackwood, the senior board member, a man whose wealth was matched only by his ego, sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. "Cassian," Richard's voice carried the weight of assumed authority. "I trust you understand why we've called this meeting." "To discuss my marriage," Cassian replied evenly, taking his seat. "Though I wasn't aware my personal life fell under board oversight. When it affects company image, it becomes our concern," Patricia Chen, another board member, interjected. "A CEO who impulsively marries a stranger? The press is already asking questions." Cassian's hand moved to his watch, but he caught himself, remembering Willa's words about being exactly who you are. "My marriage was unexpected, yes, but not impulsive. I made a choice, a personal one, that has no bearing on my ability to lead this company." "No bearing?" Richard scoffed. "Your wife runs a flower shop. How do you think that looks to our investors, to our partners?" "It looks like I married someone who built her own successful business from the ground up." Cassian's voice carried a steel edge. "Someone who understands customer service, market dynamics, and sustainable growth. Would you prefer I married someone whose only qualification was a trust fund?" The barb hit home. Richard's daughter was notorious for burning through startups, funded by daddy's money. "The point is," Patricia cut in smoothly, "this behavior seems out of character. We're concerned about your judgment." "My judgment?" Cassian stood, his height becoming imposing. "In the 5 years I've been CEO, I've tripled our market share, expanded into 3 new territories, and maintained a profit margin that exceeds industry standards. All while being, in your words, out of character, controlled, predictable, safe." He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward. "But here's what you've forgotten. I built this company by taking calculated risks, by seeing potential where others saw problems. And that's how you see this marriage? A calculated risk?" Richard's tone was skeptical. "I see it as none of your business," Cassian replied firmly. "My personal life is my own. Judge me by my results, by my leadership, by my vision for this company. But don't presume to judge my heart." The silence that followed was electric. Finally, Beverly, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. "If I may." At Cassian's nod, she continued, "Our latest market research shows that younger demographics respond positively to authentic leadership, CEOs who demonstrate real human connections rather than maintaining artificial corporate personas." Patricia's expression shifted thoughtfully. "She has a point. A love story could actually humanize our brand." "No." Cassian's voice was quiet but firm. "My marriage isn't a marketing strategy. It's my life. Our life. And it's not up for discussion or exploitation." He gathered his papers, his movements deliberate. "Now, shall we discuss the actual business at hand? The Peterson merger won't close itself." The rest of the meeting proceeded with professional efficiency, but something had changed. The board members watched their CEO with new eyes, seeing not just the controlled executive they'd known, but a man who had found something, someone, worth fighting for. As the meeting concluded, Richard lingered behind. "Cassian," he called, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. 5 years ago, when my wife left me for her yoga instructor, it nearly broke me. But finding love again? That took real courage." He cleared his throat. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Cassian nodded. surprised by the moment of vulnerability from the usually blustering man. "Thank you, Richard." Back in his office, Cassian loosened his tie and texted Willa. "Still on for dinner? I have something to celebrate." Her reply came quickly. "Yes. Though I should warn you, I just stabbed myself with rose thorns 3 times in 5 minutes. I'm a bit of a disaster today." "You're perfect," he typed back before he could overthink it. Then, feeling bold, "I miss you." 3 dots appeared as she typed, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I miss you too. And Cassian, I'm really proud of you. Whatever happened in there." The simple words made his chest tight. He'd received accolades, awards, recognition throughout his career, but somehow this meant more. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and calls, but Cassian's mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. He'd made reservations at the Lake House, an intimate restaurant just outside town where the tables were private and the view of the water was unmatched. At 6, he left the office, stopping by a small jewelry store he'd noticed on his way to work. The elderly owner, Mr. Chen, helped him select a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny rose charm. Simple, elegant, and perfectly Willa. When he pulled up to Wild Grace Flowers, Willa was locking up, wearing a soft green dress that made her eyes sparkle behind her glasses. She'd left her hair down, the blonde waves catching the evening light. "Hi," she said softly, suddenly shy. "Hi," he replied, equally affected by her presence. "You look beautiful." A blush colored her cheeks as she adjusted her glasses. "You always look beautiful. Handsome. She stopped, laughing at herself. "Can we start over?" Instead of answering, Cassian stepped forward and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Never," he murmured. "I like us exactly as we are." The drive to the lake house was filled with comfortable conversation, Willa telling him about her day's adventures in flower arranging, while he shared carefully edited highlights from the board meeting. The restaurant was everything he'd hoped, intimate, elegant without being stuffy, with a spectacular view of the lake at sunset. Their table was on the private deck surrounded by twinkling lights. "This is gorgeous," Willa breathed, taking in the view. "So are you," Cassian said simply, enjoying the way her blush deepened. Over dinner they shared stories they hadn't yet told each other, about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Willa told him about the summer she spent with her grandmother, learning the language of flowers. Cassian shared how he'd started his company in his garage with nothing but a laptop and an idea. As their dessert arrived, a shared piece of chocolate cake, Cassian reached into his pocket. "I got you something today. It's not much, but..." Willa's eyes widened as he presented the small jewelry box. Inside, the silver bracelet caught the candlelight. "Cassian," she whispered, touching the rose charm gently. "It's perfect. May I?" When she nodded, he fastened it around her wrist, his fingers lingering on her pulse point. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for everything. For seeing me. For being brave with me." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Cassian found himself leaning forward, drawn by the warmth in her green eyes, the sweet curve of her smile. Just then, a loud group entered the restaurant, breaking the moment. But as they drove home later, Willa's hand found his on the center console, their fingers intertwining naturally. At home, they lingered in the foyer, neither wanting the evening to end. "Thank you for dinner," Willa said, fiddling with her new bracelet. "Thank you for being someone worth celebrating with," Cassian replied softly. They stood there, the air charged with unspoken words and growing feelings. Finally, Willa rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek before hurrying upstairs, leaving Cassian touching the spot where her lips had been, a smile playing at his lips. That night, in their separate rooms, both lay awake, thinking about how something that had started as an act of mutual rescue was blooming into something neither had expected but both were starting to want more than anything. Neither knew that. Tomorrow would bring a storm that would test their fragile new bond. But for tonight, in the quiet of their growing love, they were both learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself fall. The morning brought rain to Willow Creek, heavy drops that drummed against the windows of wild grace flowers. Willa hummed softly as she prepared arrangements, occasionally touching the silver bracelet on her wrist, remembering the warmth in Cassian's eyes the night before. The shop's bell chimed and she looked up expecting to see Logan with the morning's delivery. Instead, a tall man in an expensive suit stood there, water dripping from his umbrella. Something about his stance made her stomach clench. "Can I help you?" she asked, automatically adjusting her glasses. "Willa Grace Monroe?" His voice was professionally neutral. "I represent Bradford Monroe's family." The sound of her former fiancé's name made her fingers still on the roses she was trimming. "Oh. The family feels that certain matters need to be addressed." He placed a thick envelope on the counter. "Given the circumstances of your hasty marriage, they're concerned about potential legal implications." Willa's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a detailed list of wedding expenses, gifts that needed to be returned, and, most devastatingly, a demand for compensation for emotional damages to the Monroe family's reputation. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, her voice shaking. I wasn't the one who—" "They're prepared to be reasonable," the lawyer said smoothly. "Of course, if your new husband is willing to handle the settlement." The implication that she'd married Cassian for money made her chest tight. "Get out," she said quietly, but firmly. "Just get out." After he left, Willa sank onto her work stool, tears threatening. Her phone buzzed, a text from Cassian. "Missing you already? Dinner at home tonight?" She stared at the message, the word home making her heart ache. How could she tell him about this? Would he think she'd brought too much drama into his life? Would he regret? The bell chimed again. This time it was her mother, perfectly coiffed despite the rain, holding a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" Regina demanded, slapping the paper down. The local society page featured a grainy photo of Willa and Cassian at the lake house under the headline, "Wells Technologies CEO's Whirlwind Romance, Business or Pleasure." "Mom, please," Willa started, but Regina cut her off. "The Monroes are pressing charges? Honestly, Willa, how could you be so careless? First you drive Bradford away, then you drag the Wells name into this mess." "I didn't drive anyone away." Willa's voice rose. "He left. He made that choice. Because you were pushing too hard with all your little dreams. The flower shop, the garden plans, always wanting more than what, Mom? Than being small? Than being quiet? Than being whatever everyone else wanted me to be?" The shop door opened again, admitting Sadie, who took one look at the situation and moved to stand beside Willa. "Regina," she said coolly, "I believe the shop's closed for lunch." "This doesn't concern you," Regina snapped. "My best friend being harassed? That absolutely concerns me." Sadie's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Regina's lips tightened. "Fine, but this isn't over, Willa. The Monroes won't let this go, and neither will the press. You're bringing shame to two prominent families now." After she left, Sadie turned to Willa. "Okay, spill. What's happening?" Wordlessly, Willa handed her the envelope and the newspaper. As Sadie read, her expression darkened. "Those absolute—" She cut herself off. "Have you told Cassian?" Willa shook her head, twisting her bracelet. "How can I? He just defended our marriage to his board yesterday. Now there's this scandal and these demands and—" She blinked back tears. "Maybe Mom's right. Maybe I just make everything worse." "Stop." Sadie grabbed her shoulders. "That man looked at you like you hung the moon last night. Logan and I saw you two leaving the shop. Trust me, he's not going anywhere." "But, no buts, you're calling him right now." Before Willa could protest, Sadie had pulled out her phone and dialed. Cassian answered on the first ring. Willa, everything okay? The concern in his voice made her tears spill over. Can you come to the shop? Please? I'm already on my way. 15 minutes later, Cassian burst through the door, his hair damp from the rain, tie slightly askew. The moment he saw Willa's tears, he crossed the shop in 3 strides and gathered her into his arms. What happened? He asked softly. Sadie handed him the envelope and newspaper. His expression darkened as he read, his jaw tightening. I'm so sorry, Willa whispered against his chest. I never meant to bring all this drama into your life. Cassian pulled back slightly, lifting her chin with gentle fingers. Look at me. When she met his eyes, he continued, You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. But your company can handle a little gossip. His thumb brushed away a tear. And as for the Monroes, his voice hardened. Let me handle that. No, Willa said firmly, surprising herself. We handle it together. I'm not letting anyone else fight my battles. Something like pride flickered in Cassian's eyes. Together, then. Sadie cleared her throat. I'll watch the shop. You two go figure this out. In Cassian's office at Wells, Technologies, Willa felt small among the sleek furniture and city views. But Cassian's hand remained steady on her lower back as his legal team reviewed the documents. It's harassment, plain and simple, his head lawyer declared. They have no legal standing. If anything, we could counter-sue for emotional distress. No, Willa said quietly. I don't want to fight. I just want it to be over. Cassian studied, her face. What do you want to do? She thought for a moment, twisting her bracelet. I want to return the gifts, pay back the expenses, not because they deserve it, but because I want to be free of them. Completely free. Done, Cassian said immediately. I'll have accounting. No, Willa interrupted. I'll pay it. From my savings. Willa, please. She met his eyes. I need to do this myself. Understanding dawned in his expression. This wasn't about money. It was about standing on her own feet, about proving to herself and everyone else that she wasn't looking for rescue. Okay, he said softly, but let me help with the legal response. Not because you need it, but because I want to stand with you. Willa's heart swelled. He understood, really understood, what she needed. Together, she agreed. Later that evening, after the lawyers had drafted responses and Willa had written checks that made her business account significantly lighter, they sat in their kitchen. Cassian had ordered pizza, remembering her mentioning once that it was her comfort food. I'm proud of you, he said suddenly. Willa looked up, surprised. For what? For being stronger than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself. She studied him in the soft kitchen light, his slightly rumpled suit, the concern still lingering in his eyes, the way he'd dropped everything to be there for her. Cassian? I think... She took a deep breath. I think I'm falling. In love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Then Cassian was moving, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. I think, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. I've been falling in love with you since I first saw you singing to your flowers when you thought no one was watching. This time, when their lips met, there was no interruption. The kiss was soft, sweet, and perfect, like the first bloom of spring after a long winter. When they finally parted, Willa's glasses were slightly fogged, making Cassian chuckle softly as he gently straightened them. So, she whispered. What now? Now, he smiled. We face whatever comes next. Together. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first stars were peeking through the clouds. Inside, 2 people who had started as strangers were discovering that sometimes life's storms bring unexpected gifts, if you're brave enough to weather them hand in hand. The weekend arrived with golden sunshine and a sense of possibility. Willa woke early, sunlight streaming through her window. and for the first time since moving into Cassian's house, she felt truly at home. The memory of their kiss in the kitchen made her smile as she got ready for the day. Downstairs, she found Cassian already awake, attempting to make pancakes. The kitchen counter was dusted with flour, and he had a smudge of it on his cheek that made him look endearingly human in his usually pristine kitchen. "Need help?" she asked, hiding her smile. He turned, and his whole face lit up at the sight of her. "I was trying to surprise you with breakfast, but—" He gestured at the misshapen pancake in the pan. "I might be better at quarterly reports than cooking." Willa moved to stand beside him, her heart fluttering when he immediately wrapped an arm around her waist. "Here," she said, covering his hand on the spatula with hers. "It's all in the timing." Together, they managed to create a decent stack of pancakes. As they ate, Cassian seemed distracted, adjusting his watch more frequently than usual. "Everything okay?" Willa asked, reaching across the table to touch his hand. He caught her fingers, bringing them to his lips in a gesture that made her blush. "I have something to show you, if you're free today." "The shop's closed on Saturdays," she reminded him, curious. "Perfect." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Change into something comfortable for walking." 30 minutes later, they were driving out of town, following the winding road that led into the hills. Willa noticed that Cassian seemed both excited and nervous, his usual CEO composure slightly cracked. They turned onto a private drive bordered by old oak trees. At the end stood a beautiful Victorian house, white with deep blue trim, surrounded by sprawling grounds. "What is this place?" Willa asked as they parked. Cassian took her hand, leading her not toward the house but around it. "I bought it last week," he said quietly, "after our first dinner together." "You bought a house?" Willa's eyes widened behind her glasses. "Not exactly." They rounded the corner, and Willa gasped. Stretching before them was a vast garden, overgrown, but beautiful in its wild state. Stone pathways wound through beds of untamed flowers, and an old greenhouse sparkled in the morning sun. "I bought this," Cassian said softly, watching her face. "For you. For us." Willa stared at him, speechless. "You mentioned wanting to expand your business," he continued quickly, suddenly unsure of her silence. "And I thought the greenhouse could be perfect for year-round growing. The gardens could host weddings, there's plenty of space for design workshops. And the house—" He ran a hand through his hair. "Well, I thought maybe someday, if you wanted." Willa's eyes filled with tears, making him panic slightly. "It's too much," he said. "I'm sorry, I should have asked first. I just got excited about the possibility and—" She cut him off with a kiss, rising on her tiptoes to press her lips to his. When she pulled back, she was beaming despite her tears. "It's perfect," she whispered. "But Cassian, this must have cost." "Don't," he said gently. "This isn't about money. It's about believing in you. In us." He led her through the gardens, showing her how he'd imagined each space could be transformed. Willa's mind was already racing with possibilities. A rose garden here, a meditation space there, perhaps a water feature by the old oak tree. In the greenhouse, sunlight filtered through old glass panels, creating rainbow patterns on the stone floor. Willa moved through the space in wonder, touching the antique workbenches, examining the vintage propagation system. The previous owner was a botanist, Cassian explained. She passed away last year and her children didn't want to maintain it. When I saw it, I just knew. "Knew what?" Willa asked softly. "That this was where your dreams could grow. Just..." Then a familiar voice called from outside. "Hello? Anybody home?" They emerged from the greenhouse to find Logan and Sadie standing in the garden, looking around in amazement. "Surprise," Cassian said. "I asked them to come help us start clearing the beds. If you want to take this on, we'll need all the help we can get." Willa's heart swelled at how he'd included her friends, how he understood that her dreams were intertwined with the people she loved. They spent the day working in the garden, clearing weeds and discovering hidden treasures. Old statuary, forgotten herb beds, even a small pond choked with water lilies. Sadie and Logan teased them mercilessly about being disgustingly in love, but their joy was genuine. As the sun began to set, they sat on the old stone patio, sharing sandwiches and lemonade that Sadie had brought. Willa leaned against Cassian's chest, his arms wrapped around her, both of them dusty and tired but content. "I can't believe you did this," she murmured. "Believe it," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You make me want to do crazy, wonderful things." "Speaking of crazy," Sadie interjected, "have you seen the latest gossip?" Willa tensed slightly, but Cassian's arms tightened reassuringly around her. "Apparently," Logan continued, "Mrs. Henderson's Breakfast Club is now Team Willa. They're saying it's the greatest love story since Romeo and Juliet, though hopefully with less death and better communication." Everyone laughed, the tension broken. But Willa noticed how Cassian's hand had moved to his watch, a tell she now recognized. Later, after their friends had left and they were walking the grounds one last time, she asked him about it. "What's really bothering you?" Cassian was quiet for a moment. "The board. They're concerned about the Monroe situation, not because they believe the accusations, but because of potential investor reaction. They've suggested we do a formal interview, control the narrative." "Oh." Willa twisted her bracelet. "What kind of interview?" "A puff piece, basically. CEO finds love in small town. They think it would humanize the company's image." His voice was carefully neutral. "But I told them it's your decision too. This affects both of us." Willa considered this as they walked. Finally, she stopped, turning to face him in the twilight. "Why did you really buy this place?" she asked softly. Cassian looked surprised by the question. "Because I love you," he said simply. "Because I want to build a life with you, support your dreams, create something beautiful together." "Then let's do the interview," she said firmly. "Not for the board or the investors or anyone else, but to show that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love, even when it doesn't follow anyone else's script." Cassian's eyes softened as he looked at her. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the same time you got so romantic," she teased, adjusting her glasses with a smile. He caught her hand, pulling her close. "I love you," he murmured. "Even when your hands are covered in dirt and you've got mulch in your hair." "I love you too," she whispered back. "Even when you try to make pancakes and nearly burn down the kitchen." Their laughter echoed through the garden as the first stars appeared above them. Neither knew that the interview would bring unexpected consequences, but in that moment, standing in their new beginning, they were ready to face whatever came next. Together. The day of the interview dawned bright and clear, but Willa's stomach was in knots as she stood in their bedroom, trying to decide what to wear. Cassian found her surrounded by discarded outfits, adjusting her glasses nervously in front of the mirror. "Hey," he said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You look beautiful." She met his eyes in the reflection. I want to look right, professional, like someone worthy of—" "Don't," he interrupted gently, turning her to face him. "You're not just worthy. You're extraordinary." His fingers brushed her cheek. "Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself." An hour later, they sat in the sunroom of the Grand Hotel, Willow Creek's finest establishment, across from Catherine Mitchell, a reporter from Business and Life magazine. Willa had chosen a soft green dress that matched her eyes and made her feel confident, while Cassian wore one of his usual impeccable suits. "So," Catherine began, her smile professional but warm, "tell me how you two met." They shared a look, remembering that moment in the chapel. Cassian took Willa's hand as they began their story. The interview went smoothly at first. Catherine seemed genuinely moved by their tale of finding love in an unexpected moment. But then her questions turned sharper. "Some might say this was a convenient marriage," she probed. "The abandoned bride, the wealthy CEO. How do you respond to accusations that this was more business arrangement than romance?" Before Cassian could speak, Willa straightened in her chair. Love isn't convenient, she said quietly but firmly. It's messy and unexpected, and sometimes it looks crazy to the outside world. But when it's real, she squeezed Cassian's hand. When it's real, you find the courage to choose it anyway. Catherine's eyes softened, but she pressed on. And the Monroe family's claims? Are baseless, Cassian stated, his CEO voice emerging, and have been legally addressed. What about the new property purchase? Catherine asked. The old Victorian estate? Willa felt Cassian tense beside her. They hadn't made that public yet. That's meant to be a surprise, he said carefully. For whom? Catherine pressed. Your shareholders? For my wife, Cassian replied firmly. Because I believe in her dreams. The interview concluded shortly after, but Willa's unease lingered. As they walked through the hotel lobby, she noticed people watching them, whispering behind their hands. Then she heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. Well, if it isn't the happy couple. Bradford Monroe, her former fiancé, stood by the hotel bar, drink in hand. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a bland way with an expression of perpetual superiority. Cassian's arm tightened around her waist. Mr. Monroe, he said coolly. You know, Bradford continued as if Cassian hadn't spoken. I've been thinking about that day, Willa. About why I left. He took a step closer. It wasn't just cold feet. It was watching you plan that ridiculous garden wedding, going on about your little flower shop dreams. I realized you'd never be satisfied with being a proper wife. Step back, Cassian warned, but Willa placed a gentle hand on his chest. No, she said softly. Let him speak. I want to hear this. Bradford's smile was cruel. You were always too much, Willa. Too dreamy, too clumsy, too ambitious. I needed someone who understood their place. Their place? Willa's voice was steady now. You mean someone small enough to make you feel big? Look at you now. Bradford scoffed. Playing at being a CEO's wife, pretending you belong in his world. How long before he realizes what I did? That you'll never be enough? Willa felt Cassian move to defend her, but she stepped forward instead. You're right about one thing, she said clearly. I would never have been satisfied being your wife, because you wanted me to be less, and Cassian, she smiled, feeling truly free of Bradford's shadow at last. Cassian loves me for being more. You little... Bradford started forward, but suddenly Logan was there, stepping between them. Problem here? He asked mildly, but his stance was protective. No problem, Cassian said, his voice dangerous. Mr. Monroe was just leaving. Bradford looked around, seeming to realize he'd drawn an audience. With a final sneer, he turned and walked away. But the damage was done. As they drove home, Willa was quiet, Bradford's words echoing in her mind. Talk to me, Cassian said softly as they pulled into their driveway. What if... She twisted her bracelet. What if the article makes things worse? What if people think what Bradford thinks? That I'm not... enough? Cassian parked the car but didn't move to get out. Instead, he turned to her fully. Do you remember what you said to Catherine? About love being messy and unexpected? Willa nodded. Before I met you, he continued, my life was perfectly ordered, predictable, safe, and completely empty. His hand cupped her cheek. You brought color and chaos and joy into my world. You make me brave enough to be messy, to be unexpected, to be real. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But your company will survive a little gossip. But I wouldn't survive losing you. She leaned into his touch. I love you, she whispered. Even when it's messy. I love you, he replied. Because it's messy. That evening, as they lay together on the couch, Willa's head on Cassian's chest, his phone buzzed. It was Beverly, his assistant. Sir, she said when he answered, you need to see this. Someone had leaked early proofs of the magazine article to social media. But instead of the romantic story they'd shared, it had been twisted into a sensational exposé. CEO's suspicious wedding. The truth behind Wells Technologies' small-town scandal. The article painted Willa as a calculated social climber who had orchestrated her own abandonment to trap a wealthy husband. It suggested the garden property was a payoff, citing anonymous sources who claimed she had been planning this for months. Worst of all, it included private details about both, their past relationships implying a pattern of manipulation. Willa read it over Cassian's shoulder, her hands shaking. How did they... Beverly? Cassian's voice was tight with fury. Get me Catherine Mitchell, now. But before Beverly could respond, another call came through. Richard Blackwood, from the board. Emergency board meeting, he said without preamble. Tomorrow morning. This situation needs to be addressed. After he hung up, Willa stood, her movements jerky. I need some air. Willa, wait. But she was already heading for the door. Outside, the night air was cool on her tear-stained face. She walked without direction, ending up in their new garden property. In the moonlight, the overgrown beds looked wild and beautiful, full of potential and promise. Just like their love had been before the world tried to tame it into submission. She heard footsteps behind her and knew it was Cassian without turning. He always found her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've ruined everything. Instead of responding, he wrapped his arms around her from behind just as he had that morning, a lifetime ago it seemed. Look up, he said softly. She did. Above them, stars sparkled between the branches of the old oak trees. That's our truth, he murmured. Not their stories, not their judgments. Just us, choosing each other every day. Willa turned in his arms. The board meeting can wait. His eyes were fierce in the moonlight. First, we need to decide something more important. What? Whether we let them write our story, or whether we're brave enough to write our own. As if in answer, a shooting star streaked across the sky, and in that moment, standing in their wild garden under the infinite stars, Willa and Cassian chose, once again, and forever, to be brave together. Dawn painted the Wells Technologies boardroom in shades of gold as Cassian stood at the bow window, watching the city wake up. Behind him, board members filed in silently, their faces grave. Willa's chair beside him remained empty. They had decided together that this was his battle to fight. The numbers are concerning, Richard Blackwood began without preamble. Our stock dropped 12 points after that article leaked. 3 major investors have expressed doubts about the company's stability. Cassian turned from the window, his expression calm. And? Patricia Chen's voice rose slightly. Cassian, this isn't just about your personal life anymore. The company's reputation is built on innovation, integrity, and courage, Cassian interrupted. He moved to the head of the table but didn't sit. When I started this company, everyone said it was too risky. When I expanded into new markets, you all said it was too soon. Every major success we've had came from taking chances that others called mistakes. This is different, Richard insisted. The scandal. What scandal? Cassian's voice was sharp. That I fell in love. That I married someone who makes me better, braver, more human. If that damages our reputation, then maybe our reputation needs damaging. The board has drafted a statement, Patricia said carefully, distancing the company from the situation, suggesting a temporary leave of absence while things settle. Cassian smiled, but there was steel in it. No. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Instead, I've drafted my own statement and a proposal. The board members exchanged wary looks as he distributed copies. Wild Grace Gardens, he began, a new subsidiary of Wells Technologies, focusing on sustainable urban development through green spaces and community gardens, starting with the Victorian property, but expanding to transform unused corporate spaces across all our locations into public gardens and educational centers. You want to turn the company into a gardening business? Richard scoffed. I want to evolve it, Cassian corrected. Combine technological innovation with environmental responsibility. Create spaces that bring communities together. And yes, his smile softened. It was inspired by my wife's vision. This is, Patricia began, but Beverly interrupted, rushing into the room. Sir, you need to see this. She turned on the boardroom's large screen, pulling up social media feeds. Hundreds of posts were appearing under dark Wild Grace and Darn Love Winds. Photos of Willa's flower shop, stories from customers about her kindness, testimonials from corporate clients about her professionalism, and at the center of it all, a video going viral. The screen showed Willa in her garden that morning, soil on her hands, speaking directly to the camera with quiet strength. You've all read stories about us, she said, adjusting her glasses. About the CEO and the florist, about scandal and secrets. But here's the real story. Love isn't a business transaction. It's not about status or money or what other people think is proper. It's about choosing to be brave. About seeing someone's true self and saying yes to all of it. The messy parts, the beautiful parts, the parts that don't fit anyone else's plan. The camera panned to show Sadie and Logan working beside her, transforming the overgrown garden beds. This garden is my dream, Willa continued. Not because it's grand or impressive, but because it's real. Like our love story. And if that makes some people uncomfortable. She smiled, and her quiet confidence filled the screen. Well, maybe they need to get more comfortable with real things. The video ended with a simple message. Coming soon. Wild Grace Gardens, where love grows free. Silence filled the boardroom. Then Richard cleared his throat. How many views? Over 2 million in 3 hours, Beverly reported. And climbing. Corporate social media says they haven't seen engagement like this since the company launched. Patricia was studying the proposal with new interest. The projected revenue from corporate events alone is conservative, Cassian said. I haven't even included the educational programs Willa's designing, or the potential for ecotourism. You really believe in this, Richard said slowly. It wasn't a question. I believe in her, Cassian replied simply, the way she believed in me when I took a chance at that chapel. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. The board meeting lasted another hour, but its outcome was already decided. When Cassian finally emerged, Willa was waiting in his office, pacing nervously. Beverly showed me the video, he said, pulling her into his arms. You amazing, brave woman. I had to do something, she whispered against his chest. I couldn't let them hurt you because of me. Because of us, he corrected gently. And they didn't. He told her about the meeting, about how her video had changed everything. About how the board had ultimately voted to fast-track the Wild Grace Gardens initiative. Really? Her eyes shone with happy tears. They're letting us do it? They're letting us do it our way, he confirmed. No compromise, no hiding. Just us, being brave together. Joy bubbled up inside her, spilling over in laughter. We should celebrate. I'll call Sadie and Logan. Actually, Cassian interrupted softly, I had something else in mind first. He led her to his car, driving them to their garden property. The afternoon sun warmed the old Victorians' white walls as they walked the grounds, hand in hand. Remember when you told me about dreaming of getting married in a wildflower meadow? He asked, stopping beneath the ancient oak tree. Willa's breath caught as she noticed white chairs arranged in a semicircle, fairy lights strung through the branches above them. Reverend Miller stood waiting along with Sadie, Logan, and Beverly. Cassian. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The first time we did this, it was an act of courage born from pain. This time, he smiled, his eyes full of love. This time it's an act of joy born from choice. Will you marry me again, Willa Grace Wells? This time with no doubts, no shadows. Just us choosing each other in the light. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. Yes. 1,000 times yes. The ceremony was simple and perfect. Willa wore her green dress, now slightly dirt-stained from gardening. Cassian's tie was crooked and neither of them cared. They exchanged rings that Beverly had somehow acquired. Willa suspected she could probably acquire anything given enough notice, and vows that came straight from their hearts. I choose you, Cassian said, his voice rough with emotion. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Because you make me want to be real too. I choose you, Willa replied, her hand steady in his. Not because you're strong, but because you're brave enough to be vulnerable. You make me brave too. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in colors no flower could match, Reverend Miller pronounced them married, again and for real and forever. Later, as they danced under the fairy lights with their chosen family around them, Willa looked up at her husband. Do you ever regret it? That first day in the chapel? Never, he said firmly. But I don't think of it as our beginning anymore. No? No. He smiled, the smile that was only ever for her. Our real beginning was every day after that. Every time we chose each other. Every time we were brave together. And now? She asked softly. What comes next? Cassian looked around at their wild, beautiful garden, at the life they were building together. Now we keep choosing, keep being brave, keep growing something real and messy and wonderful. Together, Willa said, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. Together, he agreed, holding her close as the stars began to appear above them. And in that moment, in their garden of second chances and new beginnings, they knew that their love story wasn't about perfect timing or fairy tale endings. It was about the courage to begin again, the strength to grow through storms, and the wisdom to know that real love, like the most beautiful gardens, thrives best when it grows wild and free. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the restored Victorian windows of Wild Grace Gardens, catching the diamond drops of dew on newly unfurled petals. Willa stood in the doorway of the greenhouse, her golden-framed glasses slightly misty from the warm, humid air inside, watching as Cassian carefully transplanted seedlings with their youngest gardening class. Remember, he was saying to the wide-eyed children gathered around him, sometimes the strongest plants start from the smallest seeds. You just have to be patient and believe in them. His corporate suits had long since been replaced by casual clothes for these Saturday morning sessions, though he still unconsciously adjusted his watch whenever a plant didn't cooperate with his careful handling. Like you and Miss Willa? Piped up Lucy, one of their regular students. Cassian looked up, catching Willa's eye with a smile that still made her heart skip. Exactly like that. The past year had transformed more than just the gardens. Wild Grace had bloomed into something beyond either of their dreams, part business, part community center, part sanctuary. The restored greenhouse hosted everything from corporate team-building workshops to children's science classes. The formal gardens had become Willow Creek's most sought-after wedding venue, while the kitchen gardens supplied fresh produce to local food banks. Sadie had opened a small cafe in the converted carriage house, serving her famous pastries to visitors. Logan, when not making deliveries for the expanded flower shop, led nature walks through the wildflower meadow they'd planted, together. Even Regina had slowly come around, especially after Wild Grace Gardens was featured in several national magazines. These days, she could often be found giving grandiose tours to her friends, conveniently forgetting her initial opposition to the whole endeavor. Wells Technologies had thrived too, its new green initiatives attracting positive attention and innovative partnerships. The board had finally stopped sending concerned emails about Cassian's hands-on involvement in the gardens, especially after their stock price hit record highs. Daydreaming? Cassian's voice brought Willa back to the present as the children filed out for their snack break at Sadie's cafe. Just thinking how far we've come, she replied, leaning into him as his arms wrapped around her waist. Remember when you couldn't even make toast? Remember when you thought you weren't enough? He countered softly, pressing a kiss to her, a temple. She turned in his arms, taking in his dirt-smudged face and tender expression. "I love you," she said simply. "More every day." "Good thing we have forever then," he murmured, pulling her closer. A commotion from outside drew their attention. Through the greenhouse glass they could see Beverly, who had somehow become the garden's unofficial event coordinator on top of her corporate duties, directing the setup for tomorrow's spring festival. "We should help," Willa said, but made no move to leave Cassian's embrace. "In a minute," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "First, I have something to show you." He led her to the back of the greenhouse, where they kept their experimental plants. There, in a special pot, a unique bloom was unfurling, a rose they'd spent months carefully cultivating. "It worked," Willa breathed, touching the petals gently. The flower was a stunning blend of steel blue and soft green, exactly matching their eyes. "The brave love rose," Cassian said proudly. "Beverly's already got a waiting list of orders." Willa felt happy, tears welling up. "It's perfect. Almost as perfect as you," he whispered, then chuckled as she blushed and adjusted her glasses. Outside, their friends and community worked together, preparing for tomorrow's celebration. Inside, the greenhouse surrounded by growing things and golden light, Willa and Cassian held each other close, their love still blooming, still growing, still beautifully, perfectly real. They had chosen each other that day in the chapel, chosen each other through storms and sunshine, and would keep choosing each other every day forward. Because real love, like their gardens, needs daily tending, constant care, and the courage to let it grow wild and free. And in the end, that's what makes it bloom forever. The end. Which moment in the story was more meaningful to you? When Cassian offered his hand to Willa at the altar, showing that sometimes love is born from the courage of two bruised souls, or when he bought and revealed the garden to her, proving that true love doesn't just accept our dreams but makes them grow. What does this say about how genuine love can transform us and give us the strength to be who we really are? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.